At my granddaughter's wedding, my seat was beside the janitor's closet. Not near the family table. Not near the dance floor. Not even inside the ballroom. Just a folding chair beside a gray metal door marked staff only. I stood there holding my little cream-colored place card while guests in tuxedos and satin gowns brushed past me without making eye contact. For a moment, I honestly thought there had been some kind of mistake. Then I heard my daughter-in-law Vanessa laugh softly behind me and say, "At least she won't embarrass us in the photos. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from because by the time this night ended, my family would never look at each other the same way again." The Whitmore family had always loved appearances. Beautiful houses. Beautiful vacations. Beautiful Christmas cards sent out every December with matching outfits and forced smiles. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people envied. But standing there in the hallway of the Grand Bellamy Hotel at 72 years old, I realized appearances were all we had left. The ballroom doors were open just enough for me to see the chandeliers glowing overhead. I could hear soft jazz music drifting into the hallway along with bursts of laughter and clinking champagne glasses. My granddaughter Olivia's wedding looked exactly like the kind of elegant celebration she dreamed about since she was a little girl. White roses, gold table settings, crystal candle holders reflecting warm light across the room. I had helped pay for almost every detail of it. 3 months earlier, I sold Harold's vintage Cadillac to cover the deposit on the venue. My late husband had spent 15 years restoring that car in our garage. Cherry red paint. White leather seats. He used to polish it every Sunday morning while drinking black coffee from an Old Navy mug. Selling it broke my heart a little more than I admitted to anyone. But Olivia cried when she hugged me afterward and said, "Grandma, you just made my dream wedding possible." At the time it felt worth it. I adjusted the sleeves of my navy blue dress and looked down at my shoes, suddenly embarrassed by how sensible they looked compared to the glittering heels clicking across the marble floor nearby. I had spent nearly 2 hours getting ready that afternoon. I curled my silver hair carefully, put on the pearl earrings Harold bought me for our 40th anniversary, even sprayed the last few drops of my favorite perfume behind my wrists. A ridiculous thing for an old woman to care about, maybe, but I wanted to look nice for my granddaughter's wedding. I wanted to feel like I still belonged somewhere. A young waiter carrying a tray of champagne paused beside me awkwardly. "Ma'am," he whispered gently, "would you like me to ask someone about your seating?" Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared beside us with that polished smile she used whenever other people were watching. "Everything's fine," she said quickly. "Evelyn prefers quieter areas. Don't you, Evelyn?" I looked at her carefully. Vanessa was beautiful in the sharp, expensive way magazine women are beautiful. Perfect blonde waves. Perfect white teeth. A diamond bracelet on her wrist that my son probably couldn't actually afford. She always spoke sweetly enough to avoid sounding cruel, but there was something underneath her voice that reminded me of ice forming over a lake. Thin. Cold. Dangerous if you step too far onto it. "I didn't realize the hallway counted as part of the reception," I said softly. Her smile tightened for half a second. "Oh, don't be sensitive tonight. Olivia already has enough stress." Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Please don't make this about yourself." She walked away before I could respond, disappearing back into the golden warmth of the ballroom, while I remained beside the janitor's closet holding my purse against my chest like some lost hotel guest. Across the room, I spotted my son Daniel speaking with a group of business associates near the bar. For a second I thought about walking over to him, asking him quietly if he knew where they had seated me, asking him if this humiliation had really been intentional. But then he glanced toward me briefly and looked away so fast it answered the question before I even asked it. That hurt more than the chair. More than the hallway. More than the closet door beside me with its faded caution sticker peeling at the corners. My own son knew, and he had allowed it. I sat down slowly at the tiny round table they'd placed against the wall. There wasn't even a centerpiece. Just a stack of folded extra napkins and a small emergency flashlight sitting beside the salt shaker. Through the ballroom doors I could see the family table glowing beneath soft candlelight. Olivia was laughing with her bridesmaids. Daniel had his arm around Vanessa. Everyone looked happy. Complete. Like a family portrait I had somehow been cropped out of. I folded my place card carefully and slipped it into my purse before anyone could see my hands shaking. Then I noticed something else. Printed beneath my name in tiny gold letters were 3 words that made my stomach turn cold. Family overflow seating. The music inside the ballroom swelled as the wedding coordinator announced the bride and groom for their first dance. Everyone stood applauding while I remained alone in the hallway beside a housekeeping cart draped with extra white tablecloths. The scent of bleach and lemon cleaner drifted faintly from beneath the metal closet door beside me. I remember staring at that door and thinking how strange life could become. 40 years ago, I hosted Thanksgiving dinners for 20 people in a house full of noise and warmth. Now I was sitting beside industrial cleaning supplies at my own granddaughter's wedding. A busboy rushed past carrying dirty champagne flutes, barely noticing me. Another guest accidentally bumped my chair without apologizing. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap and watched the reflection of the ballroom lights shimmer across the polished marble floor. No one came looking for me. Not Olivia. Not Daniel. Not even Vanessa pretending to check whether I needed anything. It was as though once they moved me out of sight, they forgot I existed at all. I reached into my purse and touched the small velvet box resting inside. It held the diamond earrings my husband bought for me, the year Daniel graduated from law school. Harold had worked overtime for nearly 6 months to afford them. He handed them to me wrapped in newspaper because we could not afford gift boxes back then. For the woman who kept this family standing, he told me that night. I almost gave those earrings to Olivia as her wedding present. Instead, I had written her a check for $40,000 to help pay for this evening. The ballroom, the flowers, the 5-tier cake covered in sugar roses, even the string quartet playing near the dance floor. I suddenly wondered if anyone inside that room knew where the money had come from, or if Vanessa had carefully rewritten history the same way she rewrote seating charts. Through the open ballroom doors, I spotted Olivia dancing with her new husband beneath soft golden lights while guests smiled around them. She looked beautiful, nervous and radiant in the way brides often do when they are trying to hold on to happiness tightly enough to keep it from slipping away. For a moment, I wanted to believe she knew nothing about what had happened to me tonight. But then I remembered the tiny pause earlier that afternoon when she hugged me at the church. "I hope you like your table, Grandma," she had said too quickly before glancing toward Vanessa. At the time, I thought she sounded anxious about ordinary wedding details. Now the memory settled heavily in my chest. A woman around my age approached my table carrying a glass of white wine. I recognized her after a moment as Margaret Pierce, one of Harold's old co-workers' wives. "Evelyn," she said softly, lowering herself into the empty chair across from me. "I have been looking all over for you." I forced a smile. Apparently I was difficult to find. Her eyes flickered toward the janitor's closet before returning to mine. She looked uncomfortable, embarrassed even. "I thought perhaps you requested privacy," she said carefully. "That is what Vanessa told everyone." I let out a quiet breath through my nose. Of course she did. Margaret hesitated before leaning slightly closer. For what it is worth, Harold would not have tolerated this. The mention of my husband nearly unraveled something inside me. But I kept my expression calm. Harold had been gone for 6 years, yet sometimes I still expected him to walk into rooms and fix things simply by standing there. He had a way of making people behave better without ever raising his voice. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "Some people forget who carried them when life was difficult," she whispered. Then she stood and returned to the reception before anyone noticed she had been sitting with me. I watched her disappear into the crowd while laughter echoed from inside the ballroom again. Then, just as I was about to unfold my napkin, I heard Vanessa's voice drifting from nearby behind the partially open service hallway door. "I do not care if she feels insulted," she snapped quietly. "She should be grateful we invited her at all." The hallway suddenly felt colder after I heard Vanessa's voice through the service door. I stayed perfectly still, my fingers resting against the edge of the tablecloth while her words echoed in my head. She should be grateful we invited her at all. There was another woman with her, probably one of the bridesmaids from the sound of the younger voice. "But she paid for most of this wedding," the woman whispered nervously. Vanessa gave a short laugh. "Exactly. That is what she is good for." I heard heels clicking against the tile floor as they moved farther down the hallway. Then silence returned. Soft music drifted from the ballroom again. Somewhere nearby, silverware clattered onto serving trays. I sat there for several seconds staring at the emergency exit sign glowing above the corridor like my body had forgotten how to move. The strange thing about humiliation is that it rarely arrives all at once. It settles slowly, quietly, like dust collecting in the corners of a room you stopped cleaning years ago. Looking back, I realized tonight had not truly started at the hotel. It started long before this wedding. Long before the hallway table and the janitor's closet. It started the first time Vanessa corrected the way I folded napkins at Thanksgiving dinner in my own house. The first time Daniel canceled Christmas morning because Vanessa's family already had plans. The first time I was told Olivia's dance recital had been moved to another weekend, only to later see photographs online proving everyone else attended without me. Ding moments. Tiny exclusions. Each one small enough to excuse on its own. Together they formed something much uglier. A server stopped beside my table carrying a tray of miniature crab cakes. "Would you like one, ma'am?" he asked kindly. I realized then I had not eaten all day. I took one and thanked him softly. The bite tasted cold and overly salty. Across the ballroom, guests laughed as the best man began his speech. Through the open doors I could see Daniel smiling proudly beside Vanessa as though they were the perfect hosts. His tuxedo fit him well. Harold would have been proud of how successful he looked. That thought hurt almost as much as everything else. Because Harold never saw this version of our son. He never saw the way Daniel slowly learned to look away whenever something uncomfortable happened. When Daniel was 10 years old, he once cried for an entire afternoon because he accidentally stepped on a bird's nest while mowing the lawn. He carried guilt in his heart for weeks afterward. That little boy would never have seated his mother beside a maintenance closet. Somewhere along the way, life polished the softness out of him. I looked down at my phone resting beside my plate. No messages. No explanation. No apology. Just a lock-screen photograph of Harold standing beside our old Cadillac, smiling into the sun with grease stains on his hands. I remembered the afternoon I sold that car. The buyer drove it away while I stood in the driveway pretending not to cry. Vanessa hugged me tightly afterward and said, "Olivia is going to remember your generosity forever." I believed her then. That was the embarrassing part. Not the hallway. Not the folding chair. The embarrassing part was how completely I believed these people loved me whenever they needed something. The ballroom doors opened wider as guests moved toward the dance floor. A little girl in a flower crown accidentally wandered into the hallway before her mother rushed over and gently guided her back inside. For a second, the child looked at me curiously like she could not understand why an old woman was sitting alone out there. Honestly, neither could I anymore. Then I noticed something strange near the ballroom entrance. Mounted beside the seating chart was a large framed sign written in elegant gold script. "Special thanks to our beloved families for making tonight possible." Beneath it were several names. Vanessa's parents, the groom's parents, even distant relatives who had contributed almost nothing to the wedding. My name was nowhere on the list. I kept staring at the sign near the ballroom entrance while guests passed beneath it smiling and laughing with glasses of champagne balanced carefully in their hands. The gold lettering shimmered beneath the chandelier light as though gratitude itself had become decoration for the evening. But my name was missing completely. Not small. Not misspelled. Just erased. I do not know why that hurt more than the hallway table, but it did. Perhaps because it confirmed something I had spent years trying not to see. It is one thing to be overlooked accidentally. It is another thing entirely to be edited out on purpose. I stood slowly from my chair and smoothed the wrinkles from my dress. My knees ached from sitting too long on the metal folding chair, but I lifted my chin anyway and walked toward the ballroom entrance. No one stopped me. No one greeted me either. I paused beside the framed sign and pretended to adjust my purse while reading the names again carefully, just in case I somehow missed my own. Vanessa's parents were listed first in large elegant script despite contributing nothing except opinions about flower arrangements and wine selections. The groom's aunt who paid for the rehearsal dinner was listed. A cousin who designed the invitations was listed. Even the family friend who donated pastries for the dessert table had her bakery logo printed at the bottom. I felt oddly calm as I realized what had happened. This was not careless. It was curated. Deliberate. Vanessa had organized every visible detail of this wedding down to the shade of the napkins and the placement of candles. If my name was absent, it was because she wanted it absent. Beautiful, is it not? A voice beside me asked gently. I turned and found Olivia standing therein. Her wedding gown holding her bouquet loosely against her waist. Up close, she looked exhausted beneath her makeup. The kind of exhaustion that comes from smiling for too many hours while trying to keep everyone else comfortable. It is beautiful, I answered softly. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the sign before quickly looking away again. That tiny movement told me everything. She knew. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not the hallway table or the comments from Vanessa. But she knew enough to avoid meeting my eyes. Grandma, she began quietly. There were just so many seating changes and last-minute problems and… Olivia, I interrupted gently. Did you know where they seated me? Her face tightened instantly. Not anger. Shame. Young shame. The kind people feel when they know something is wrong but lack the courage to challenge it. Vanessa handled most of the reception details, she whispered. I was overwhelmed. I nodded slowly because I suddenly understood something important. Olivia had spent so many years trying to keep peace between people that she had learned to confuse silence with kindness. I recognized that habit because I once taught it to her father. You look beautiful tonight, I said instead. Her eyes filled slightly with relief that I was not causing a scene. Thank you, she whispered. Then she hugged me quickly before hurrying back toward the dance floor where photographers waited beside glowing white floral arches. I watched her disappear into the crowd while applause erupted again inside the ballroom. Somewhere behind me, the service hallway door swung open and 2 hotel employees rolled out another cart stacked with dishes. One of them glanced apologetically toward my lonely table as they passed. I returned to my seat quietly. The untouched dinner salad sat waiting beneath dim hallway lighting while warm laughter echoed from the reception only a few feet away. I picked up the dinner roll from my plate and tore off a small piece with trembling fingers. That was when my phone buzzed softly inside my purse. I pulled it out expecting perhaps a message from Daniel, finally realizing what had happened. Instead, it was a notification from the family group chat. Vanessa had posted a photograph from the head table captioned, "Celebrating with the people who matter most." For a long moment, I simply stared at the message glowing on my phone screen. Celebrating with the people who matter most. Beneath the caption were smiling faces gathered around the head table beneath golden lights and white roses. Daniel stood beside Vanessa with his arm around her waist. Olivia leaned against her new husband while guests raised champagne glasses toward the camera. Everyone looked polished, comfortable, connected, like the kind of family people frame in silver picture frames above fireplaces. I looked closer at the photograph. They had cropped the image carefully enough that no one would ever know an old woman sat alone 20 feet away beside a janitor's closet. My thumb hovered over the screen before I quietly locked the phone and slipped it back into my purse. Something inside me had gone strangely still. Not numb exactly. Clear. Like muddy water finally settling after years of being stirred. A waiter arrived carrying plates for the main course and paused awkwardly when he realized no one else was seated at my table. "Would you prefer the chicken or the salmon, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Whichever is easier," I answered. He gave me a sympathetic smile before setting down a plate of salmon beside a tiny dish of overcooked asparagus. The ballroom erupted into applause again as Olivia and her husband cut the wedding cake. I watched from my isolated table while camera flashes burst across the room like distant lightning. No one invited me closer for photographs. No one saved me a seat near the family. I picked up my fork slowly and realized I was no longer surprised. That frightened me more than the cruelty itself. Because people do not stop expecting kindness overnight. It happens gradually, one disappointment at a time. My mind drifted back to the summer after Harold died. Daniel had stood in my kitchen looking exhausted beneath the weight of funeral arrangements and unpaid business loans. Vanessa sat beside him holding his hand while explaining how difficult things had become financially. "We are just trying to stay afloat," she said softly that afternoon. I remember opening the desk drawer where Harold kept our savings bonds and quietly handing Daniel nearly $80,000 without hesitation. "Family takes care of family," I told him. Daniel cried when he hugged me. Vanessa cried too. Or at least I believe she did. Later came the requests for help with private school tuition. Then the down payment for their larger home in Brookhaven Estates. Then the expensive summer camps for the grandchildren. Every time I helped, Vanessa insisted it was temporary. Every time Daniel promised they would repay me someday. But repayment slowly changed into expectation. Gratitude faded into entitlement, so gradually I barely noticed it happening. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the band prepared for another dance set. Couples drifted toward the dance floor laughing softly together while servers refilled wine glasses. I sat alone beneath the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, and suddenly remembered something Harold told me years ago during an argument with his younger brother over borrowed money. The dangerous thing about generosity, he said while cleaning his reading glasses carefully, is that some people eventually stop seeing it as love and start seeing it as access. At the time I thought he sounded cynical. Harold always understood people more quickly than I did. A shadow appeared beside my table, and I looked up expecting another hotel employee. Instead, I found my youngest granddaughter Sophie standing there clutching her phone tightly against her chest. At 16, Sophie still had the uncomfortable honesty that adults spend years learning to hide. Her eyes moved from the empty hallway to my untouched dinner plate before settling on my face. "Grandma," she whispered quietly, "did they really put you out here by yourself?" I looked up at Sophie and forced a small smile even though my chest suddenly felt tight. Her pale blue dress was wrinkled near the waist as though she had been nervously twisting the fabric for hours. Unlike the rest of the family, she had Harold's eyes. Honest eyes. The kind that struggled to hide discomfort. Apparently they did. I answered quietly. Sophie glanced toward the ballroom entrance to make sure no one was nearby before lowering herself into the empty chair beside me. "This is horrible," she whispered. "Mom said you requested privacy because crowds overwhelm you now." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was such a carefully constructed insult. Vanessa had managed to humiliate me, while making herself appear considerate at the same time. "I see," I said softly. Sophie looked down at her phone for a moment, then back at me again. "Grandma, I do not think you understand what they say about you when you are not around." Her voice trembled slightly on the last few words. Somewhere inside the ballroom, the band started playing an old Frank Sinatra song Harold used to hum while repairing things around the house. The sound drifted faintly into the hallway while Sophie unlocked her phone with shaky fingers. "You should not have to see this tonight," she said quietly. "But I think you deserve to know." She turned the screen toward me. It was a family group chat called Wedding Core Team. I recognized the names immediately. Vanessa, Daniel, Olivia, a few cousins, bridesmaids. Dozens of messages filled the screen discussing flowers, catering, schedules, and seating arrangements. Then Sophie scrolled upward until her hand stopped abruptly. My stomach tightened before I even read the words. Vanessa, make sure Grandma Evelyn stays at the overflow table. Olivia, is the hallway too harsh? Vanessa, better than putting her near the photographers. Daniel, let us just avoid drama tonight. Then another message farther down. Vanessa, she already paid for everything anyway. The ATM grandma can survive one evening without attention. I stared at the glowing screen silently, while the music from the ballroom continued in the background like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had changed. Not because of the cruelty itself. Cruelty I could survive. It was the casualness that hollowed me out. The way they joked about me together. The way Daniel participated by saying nothing meaningful at all. Sophie quickly locked her phone again, her face pale. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I found the messages yesterday. I thought maybe Mom was just stressed because of the wedding, but then I saw where they seated you." She swallowed hard before continuing. "Grandpa would be furious." The mention of Harold settled over me quietly. For a moment, I imagined him walking through the ballroom doors in his old charcoal suit with that calm, steady expression he wore whenever someone crossed a line. Harold never shouted. He did not need to. People corrected themselves when he looked at them long enough. "Your grandfather used to believe character reveals itself in small moments," I said softly. "Not during tragedies. During conveniences." Sophie blinked quickly as though fighting tears. I tried telling Olivia this was wrong, she admitted. But she said Vanessa planned everything and she did not want conflict on her wedding day. I nodded slowly because that sounded exactly like Olivia. Sweet enough to feel guilty. Weak enough to stay silent anyway. A burst of laughter erupted from the ballroom as guests gathered near the dance floor for another toast. Sophie looked toward the noise with visible disgust before turning back to me. You know what the worst part is? She whispered bitterly. Mom keeps telling everyone tonight is about family. I looked at the empty hallway around us. The folding chair. The maintenance closet. The untouched salmon growing cold beneath fluorescent lights. Then I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate and realized something inside me had finally stopped breaking. It had started hardening instead. The rest of the evening moved around me like a performance I was no longer emotionally inside of. Music floated through the ballroom. Glasses clinked. Guests laughed too loudly after too much champagne. But something inside me had gone completely quiet. Sophie stayed beside me for a while, nervously twisting the silver ring on her finger before finally whispering that she needed to return before Vanessa noticed she was gone. I squeezed her hand gently and told her none of this was her fault. She looked relieved and heartbroken at the same time. After she disappeared back into the ballroom, I sat alone again beneath the fluorescent hallway lights staring at the folded napkin beside my untouched dinner plate. The words from the group chat kept replaying in my mind. The ATM grandma can survive one evening without attention. Strange how one sentence can suddenly reorganize 30 years of memories. I thought about every check I had written. Every sacrifice I quietly made while convincing myself it was love. Every holiday I spent cooking for people who slowly stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as infrastructure. The band announced the beginning of speeches, and guests slowly returned to their tables inside the ballroom. A hotel employee stepped into the hallway carrying a cordless microphone before pausing near me. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "We are inviting close family members to say a few words if they would like." He smiled awkwardly, clearly unsure whether I belonged to the event at all. I almost told him no. Almost remained exactly where they placed me. Quiet. Convenient. Easy to ignore. Then I heard Harold's voice in my memory as clearly as if he were standing beside me. Never allow people to rewrite your worth simply because they benefit from your silence. I stood slowly from the folding chair and smoothed the front of my navy dress. My knees cracked softly beneath the movement. The employee handed me the microphone with visible relief before hurrying back inside the ballroom. As I walked toward the reception, conversations continued without noticing me at first. The ballroom looked even more beautiful from the inside. Candlelight shimmered across crystal glasses. White roses cascaded down the center of every table. Olivia sat beside her husband smiling nervously while Vanessa leaned back in her chair looking perfectly satisfied with the evening she orchestrated. Then several guests noticed me approaching the stage area with the microphone in my hand. Conversations began softening one by one until the room settled into polite silence. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Not panic yet, just irritation. Like someone spotting rain clouds during an outdoor party. "Good evening," I said calmly into the microphone. My voice echoed gently across the ballroom speakers. "For those of you who may not know me, I am Evelyn Whitmore, Olivia's grandmother." A few guests smiled politely. Daniel stared at me with visible discomfort already forming around his eyes. I continued softly. "I have spent most of tonight sitting beside the janitor's closet down the hallway." Several heads immediately turned toward Vanessa. "At first I thought perhaps there had been some mistake," I continued. "But after a while I realized something important. Sometimes where people place you tells you exactly how they see you." The room remained perfectly silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning overhead. Vanessa forced a tight smile and reached for her wine glass without drinking from it. I looked toward Olivia then. When my husband Harold was alive, he used to say gratitude is easiest to recognize when someone no longer needs anything from you. Olivia lowered her eyes instantly. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I kept my tone gentle, controlled. "Tonight has been very educational for me. I paid for this ballroom, the flowers, the band, the catering, and somehow the only seat available for me was beside industrial cleaning supplies." A nervous ripple moved through the crowd. Someone near the back quietly whispered, "Oh my God." I smiled faintly into the microphone. But perhaps that was appropriate after all, because spending the evening near cleaning products finally helped me see this family clearly. The silence after my words felt almost physical, heavy, dense. Every fork had stopped moving. Every champagne glass remained frozen halfway to someone's lips. I stood beneath the soft ballroom lights holding the microphone steadily while dozens of faces stared back at me with varying shades of discomfort, embarrassment, and shock. Vanessa recovered first. Of course she did. Women like her survive by adjusting quickly when control begins slipping away. She forced a brittle laugh and stood from her chair with practiced elegance. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, "I think emotions are just running a little high tonight." I looked at her calmly. "No, Vanessa. Emotions were high 6 years ago when I buried my husband. Tonight is simply clarity." A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel finally stood as well, loosening his bow tie slightly as if the room had suddenly grown too warm. "Mom," he said quietly through clenched teeth, "this is not the time." That sentence settled over me strangely because I realized something important in that moment. For people like Daniel and Vanessa, there is never a convenient time to acknowledge cruelty. Silence is always considered more appropriate than accountability. I turned toward the crowd again instead of answering him directly. "I spent many years believing sacrifice naturally creates loyalty," I said softly. "But sometimes sacrifice only teaches people how much they can take from you before you finally notice." Across the ballroom, Olivia looked pale beneath her makeup. Her new husband stared down at the tablecloth with the expression of a man realizing he accidentally married into something deeply unhealthy. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "This is humiliating," she snapped under her breath. I gave a faint nod. "Yes, it is." Another silence followed. Then, from somewhere near the back of the ballroom, an older man slowly began clapping once. Quietly, deliberately. Others did not join him, but the sound itself cracked something open inside the room. The illusion had broken. People were no longer pretending not to see what happened. I placed the microphone gently onto the stand near the stage. "Before I leave," I said calmly, "there is one final thing everyone here should probably know." Daniel's face changed instantly. Fear this time. Real fear. "Mom," he warned softly, but I continued anyway. 3 months ago, after helping finance this wedding, I updated my estate documents. Vanessa's expression sharpened immediately. She took a step forward before stopping herself. "What are you talking about?" she asked carefully. I reached into my purse and removed a cream-colored envelope sealed with the letterhead of Harold's longtime attorney. "My lawyer advised me not to make emotional decisions after Harold passed away," I explained. "So I waited. I observed. I listened." The ballroom had become so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers overhead. "As of last week," I continued evenly, "the Whitmore Family Trust has been permanently restructured." Daniel stared at me without blinking. Vanessa's face had gone completely still in the frightening way predators freeze before reacting. Every dollar that was once intended for Daniel and his household will now bypass them entirely. A sharp breath escaped someone near the front tables. I continued calmly. "The trust will instead be divided equally among my grandchildren, once they each reach 30 years old. No spouse will have access to it. No parent will control it." Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. I looked directly at her for the first time all evening. "Actually, Vanessa, I have never been more serious in my life." Daniel looked physically ill now. "Mom," he said weakly, "you are overreacting because of a misunderstanding." I almost pitied him for saying that. Even now, he still believed this was about a seating chart. About one humiliating evening. He still did not understand that betrayal is never built in a single moment. It is built in patterns. Repetition. Years of watching someone decide your dignity matters less than their convenience. I picked up my purse slowly and stepped away from the microphone. "Do not worry," I said quietly. "You still have the wedding photos. Just make sure you crop me out carefully." No one tried to stop me as I walked away from the microphone stand. That was the strange part. After all those years of being expected to fix tension, smooth conflict, and absorb disrespect quietly, my family suddenly had nothing to say once I finally stopped protecting them from themselves. The ballroom remained frozen behind me as I crossed the polished floor toward the exit. Guests avoided eye contact now, not out of cruelty this time but embarrassment. A few people shifted awkwardly in their seats. Others stared openly at Vanessa and Daniel with the uncomfortable fascination people reserve for public disgrace. I did not look back at them. I had spent too many years looking back already. Near the ballroom doors, Olivia suddenly hurried toward me, gathering the heavy layers of her wedding gown in trembling hands. "Grandma, wait," she whispered breathlessly. Her mascara had begun smudging slightly beneath her eyes. For the first time all evening, she looked less like a bride and more like the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. "I never wanted this to happen," she said quietly. I studied her face for a long moment. The sadness there was real. So was the guilt. But neither one erased what she allowed. "I know," I answered gently. "That is what makes it so dangerous." Her eyes filled instantly. "Please do not leave angry." I almost smiled at that because people always fear anger more than disappointment. Anger feels explosive.
Disappointement feel permanent.
I reached up and adjusted the edge of her veil softly the same way I used to straighten her winter scarves before school when she was little. "Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of your marriage," I told her quietly. "I hope someday you learn that silence can damage relationships just as deeply as cruelty." Olivia lowered her head and began crying silently. I kissed her forehead gently before stepping past her toward the lobby. Behind me, the ballroom remained painfully quiet. No music. No laughter. Just the heavy stillness that settles over rooms after truth finally arrives. The hotel lobby felt cool and peaceful compared to the tension behind me. Marble floors reflected the soft golden light from enormous chandeliers overhead, while a pianist played quietly near the cocktail lounge across the room. For the first time all evening I could breathe normally again. A young valet attendant hurried toward me holding my coat carefully over his arm. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said respectfully. "Your car will be ready in just a moment." Mrs. Whitmore. Such a simple thing. Yet hearing my name spoken with dignity after everything that happened nearly unraveled me more than the humiliation itself. Outside the hotel entrance, cool night air wrapped around me as the valet brought my silver sedan to the curb. The city skyline shimmered in the distance beneath the dark spring sky while traffic lights reflected against rain-damp pavement. I slipped into the passenger seat for a moment before realizing my hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear anymore. Release. After several minutes, my phone began vibrating repeatedly inside my purse. Daniel calling. Then Vanessa. Then Olivia. Message after message appearing across the screen faster than I could read them. I silenced the phone without opening any of them. Some conversations arrive years too late to matter. Before pulling away from the hotel, I glanced upward one final time toward the ballroom windows glowing high above the street. Somewhere inside, photographers were probably still trying to salvage perfect wedding pictures from a broken evening. Maybe they would crop me out completely after all. Maybe future guests looking at framed photographs would never know an old woman sat alone beside a janitor's closet while her family celebrated nearby. But I would know. More importantly, so would they. I started the engine slowly and rested my hands against the steering, Will Harold once taught Olivia to polish when she was 10 years old. Then I drove into the quiet city night with the strange calm that comes after finally seeing people clearly. They seated me beside the janitor's closet, because they thought dignity could be a sign like a table number. But in the end I realized something they never understood. The cleanest place in that entire wedding was the hallway they tried to hide me in.